History tells the story of the world and of our lives. Sometimes that history goes bump in the night. Broadcasting from the center of oddity and the supernatural in Central Florida, it's the History Goes Bump podcast.
Hello, you spooktacular people. Welcome to this 568th episode of the History Goes Bump podcast. Ghost Tours for the Theater of the Mind. I am your host, Diane.
And this is Kelly.
Hey, Kelly, are you Chinese?
No.
I'm not Chinese either, and neither of us speaks Chinese.
Oh, yeah.
On this episode, we're featuring locations in Beijing, China that are haunted. So guess what, folks? It's going to be fun with pronunciations.
We do our best.
Before we get into sharing the history and haunts of several locations in Beijing, we want to welcome into the spooktacular crew, James and Matt.
Thank you for joining our Facebook group.
And now this moment in oddity.
The moment in oddity was suggested by Dewey Oxberger. Back in the early 1800s, there was a woman by the name of Tabitha Babbitt who was born in Hardwick, Massachusetts. She was a member of the Shakers, which was a millenarian restorationist Christian sect founded in 1747 in England, and then organized in the United States in the 1780s. They were originally known as the Shaking Quakers because of their ecstatic worship style, which included singing, dancing, and shouting during church services. Babbitt would often watch men at the local sawmill using two-man whip saws with considerable difficulty. She realized that half of their motion was wasted. She was a smart woman who pondered ways to create the same results as the two-man saws with more efficient effort. A weaver by trade, Babbitt's idea was to create a round blade that would rotate by being connected to her pedal-powered spinning wheel. Her prototype was then connected to a water-powered machine to maximize the effectiveness of cutting lumber. A larger version was later installed in the sawmill. There are some that dispute whether Tabitha Babbitt did indeed invent the first circular saw. Due to the Shakers' religious beliefs, Babbitt did not patent her invention. In their society, actions taken such as patents were prohibited due to the thought that intellectual properties should be shared by the entire community without restriction. While some believe that the story of Tabitha Babbitt and her invention of the circular saw is simply Shaker lore, the idea of the first circular saw being derived from a spinning wheel certainly is odd.
Turn out the lights. The party's just getting started.
And now, this month in history.
In the month of December, on the 8th in 1765, Eli Whitney was born in Westborough, Massachusetts. Eli was known as an inventor, manufacturer, mechanical engineer, and has often been considered to be the father of American technology. Despite all of his contributions to American society, Eli is most well known for his invention of the cotton gin. He attended Yale College and graduated in 1792. It was then that Whitney determined that if a machine could clean the seeds from cotton, it could be quite profitable for the South. He set about drawing up plans for his invention, and in 10 days, Eli had a rudimentary model that could separate the cotton fibers from the seeds. In 1794, he received his patent for the cotton gin. Unfortunately for Whitney, Southern planters were not willing to pay for the use of his invention. This was due to the simplicity of the machine's design, allowing for the pirating of the idea. This put Eli's company out of business by 1797. His patent was not allowed to be renewed in 1807, which led Whitney to surmise that, quote, an invention can be so valuable as to be worthless to the inventor. Eli Whitney never sought a patent for any additional inventions.
Beijing is a city with over 3,000 years of recorded history. Not only is this a city with rich history, it has a rich culture, some of which is surrounded by folklore and the supernatural. There are several haunted locations in the capital city of China. Chaonei number 81 is found in the Dongcheng district and is a unique brick structure with an obscure history that seems to be mostly connected to the Catholic Church. No one really knows why it is haunted, but it is said to be one of the most haunted locations in China. There is the Heguang Guild Hall, a haunted theater. A home for royalty, the Prince Gong's mansion, has a couple of ghost stories. The bell tower may be connected to a young woman's ultimate sacrifice, and now it occasionally rings out her haunting cry. And the Forbidden City itself has some creepy stories. Join us for the history and hauntings of Beijing, China.
The Chinese have a rich culture when it comes to ghosts. On our Legends of Taiwan episode, we discussed the Hungry Ghost Festival that is observed in that region. This festival entails performing rituals that honor dead ancestors. During the festival, it is thought that the spirits of the dead came from the underworld and mingled around the living. This was the 15th day of the 7th month in the lunar calendar. That day is called Ghost Day, and the 7th month is called the Ghost Month. It's set up totally for us, Kelly.
Sure is.
The Chinese believe that after death, a person is split into 3 different souls. The Po part goes with the body to the grave, while another part goes to judgment, and the Hun part goes into an ancestral tablet. The Po and Hun make up the elements of a hungry ghost, and it's referred to that way because those elements need to be nourished by offerings that are brought by descendants. At some point, the Po and Hun eventually make it to the underworld. Kelly, have you seen the movie Mulan from Disney?
Well, of course.
So that kind of depicts exactly what they do with hungry ghosts. You know, she goes in there and gives her offering to the ancestors, and then they all kind of pop up out of the tombstones and are talking to each other about what they're going to do. So that's exactly what we're talking about when it comes to the Hun. The Po, I've heard different things about, that it will stay with the body until the body completely decays. And then it's like it doesn't have anything else to do, so then it's off and running, I guess.
All right.
And this is very important to the Chinese. All of your ancestors are buried in the same place, and that's where you want to be buried. And some things became more difficult about that as China became more developed. You know, the huge cities can have millions and millions, like, I don't even know how many people live in Beijing. So you can have all these people that are living there, but let's say your ancestry is out in the country somewhere. Somehow you've got to get your body back there because that's where you need to go, because you need somebody to feed your hungry ghost. You do not want to be buried somewhere where you don't have anybody to take care of that. That's how important it is to them. Whatever the cost, whatever it would take, they would make sure that they got back to where everybody else was buried. I don't know if they hold as much value to that nowadays, but it definitely has been very important up into our more modern era. There are other kinds of spirit in Chinese folklore, at least 10 of them. They are similar to what we would think of as demons.
The Yagui is called a weird ghost and is said to have been concerned only with material things in life. They can transform into any physical object. The Baggui is a drought ghost, and they were full of lust in life and now create hot winds. The Meigui is a trickster ghost, and they cause people to be confused in life and can become animals in death. The Guodu Gui are venomous ghosts, and they were hateful in life and can transform into insects in death. The Ligui is a pestilence ghost that harbored grudges in life and causes disease and decay in death. There is a specific spirit called a hungry ghost that is Egui in Chinese, and these were arrogant people that can now take on gaseous forms. The Yangui is a nightmare ghost that was a fraud in life and can transform into pure darkness now. The Wangliangui are goblin ghosts and were corrupted in life and take the essential energy within rocks and trees. The Yishigui are servant ghosts who were corrupted by their desire for accomplishment in life and in death can transform into blinding light. And finally, there are the Chuan Son Gui, or messenger ghosts, which were litigious in life and can transform into any person. With all these spirits hanging around, it isn't surprising that the Chinese have no issue believing that certain locations can be haunted.
And there's like subcategories of each of those ghosts as well.
Oh my goodness.
So it's definitely a lot richer than ours. We're like, what kind of ghosts are these? Well, we have shadow figures. There's a residual haunting over there. That's an intelligent spirit. We're very boring when it comes to ghosts. And the reason why I'm not sure about how the Chinese look at this stuff now is because once the communists came in, they took away all the religious and the spiritual and that kind of stuff. So if they're still doing these things, it's not something that's embraced by the country, I would say, or the state. I'll put it that way. Beijing is the capital of China, and the discovering of Peking Man indicated that humans have been living in the area since the Neolithic period. The first formal city was built in the 11th century BC and was called Ji City, and that's spelled with a J-I. Eventually, this connected with Shenyang in 221 BC that was under the rule of the Qin dynasty. There were name changes in different dynasties that ruled through the years. Under the Mongol Yuan dynasty in 1261, Ji City became the seat of power and thus the capital of China. Beijing would get its name during the Ming dynasty in 1403. That dynasty would also rebuild the imperial palace, and this would become the Forbidden City. The Chinese feudal dynasty period ended in 1911, and Beijing was no longer the imperial capital. By 1949, it would be the capital of China again. Beijing is a city with over 3,000 years of civilized history, and one part of that history is the Chaonei Church.
The main building is distinctive and very un-Chinese in design, with a French Baroque style that seems plucked out of the Victorian era. The property is made up of 3 buildings and is surrounded by a concrete wall that opens up at a pair of opaque metal doors. The plot is 8,100 square feet and has a few deciduous trees that partially conceal the 3 buildings here. There is the main house, a larger second house, and a garage. 3 dormer windows and a brick chimney decorate the mansard roof on the main house, which is 2.5 stories with a basement. The exterior is made from brick with a Flemish bond, and metal drain pipes run down the facade. The front entrance is framed with 2 rectangular columns that hold up a small stone balcony. The larger building is 3 stories high and has a single bay tower on one corner. This has the same French Baroque styling with 4 dormer windows piercing the mansard roof. The garage is a small dilapidated brick building with a gabled roof. Until 2017, all these buildings had been left abandoned and vacant. Vining plants covered most of the exterior walls, and most of the windows had broken panes. The interiors featured broken floorboards and peeling plaster.
Most of the stuff, when I looked up the research, was talking about how it was abandoned, and it was mostly urban explorers that were posting about it and posting their pictures. And the place looked really creepy because it was these old crumbling buildings that had been taken over, back by the earth. I initially, when I was writing it, I was writing about all of the damage and what it was like on the inside and all this other stuff. And then I read on a couple other things that it said that they'd spent this amount of money or whatever renovating. And I'm going, well, where does it talk about renovations? Because I couldn't find anything about it being renovated anywhere. And then finally I found some more current pictures. And I'm like, no, clearly somebody has done something with these buildings to fix them up. I don't know all the ins and outs of when all of that took place other than sometime in 2017 they started redoing it. But I was amazed that they had done it because they looked like they were in pretty bad shape. Finding an accurate history for the building is difficult as any records before the establishment of the People's Republic of China in 1949 have been lost or incomplete. And I don't know if that's just because the communist government got rid of everything or what was going on there, but you really can't find records on a lot of stuff before they came in.
They're in the basement of the Smithsonian.
That could be. That could be. Most historians believe the building was constructed in 1910 and run as the North China Union Language School. The school mainly taught missionaries from the West how to speak Mandarin. If this is the case, that's a really fancy building to just be a language school. And again, it just looks so weird because, when you're
very out of place.
Yeah, looking at Chinese architecture, you're used to a certain kind of style, and this is nothing like that. A couple decades later, the teaching program expanded to anybody interested in learning the language, which included businessmen, diplomats, and scholars. There are some historians who disagree with that history and say the building was built in 1900 and used as a house by the French manager of the Beijing Hankou Railway at that time. Another account says that the Imperial Chinese government built the structure and gifted it to either the British government or the Catholic Church. This definitely became the property of the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Beijing in the late 1930s. When World War II started, a group of Belgian Augustinian nuns moved in and used the place as a clinic until 1946.
The Irish Presbyterian Mission moved in next. Now, there is a legend told about the time after this. The house was said to have been given to a Kuomintang officer who fled to Taiwan in 1949, leaving behind a woman who was either his mistress or wife. That woman then hanged herself in the house in despair. There is no record to support this story. In the 1950s, the communist government took control of the property and used the buildings for government business. The Red Guards occupied it for a time, but it said that they didn't stay for long because the place scared them. In 1980, the State Administration for Religious Affairs and United Front Work Department put forward an order that any property that had once belonged to a religious organization had to be returned to that organization, along with all their property. It would take until 1994 for the Catholic Church to prove their connection to Chaonei, and the Beijing Patriotic Catholic Association took ownership. At that point, the buildings were slated for demolition, but the church suggested that perhaps the buildings could be used as a Vatican embassy in China. It saved the complex from the bulldozer, but the property remained neglected. The government listed it as a historic property in 2009, and the Catholic Church still owns it.
I think. I'm not totally positive about that, but I think they do.
The buildings were renovated starting in 2017, and they can be rented out. Before the renovations, the property was a magnet for urban explorers.
And the reason why I say that is it seems weird to me that the Catholic Church would renovate it and then rent it out. So I'm not sure that they still are the owners. And as for renting it out, there's like no website that you can go to and book it for like events, like how we would do like wedding event places here.
Right.
So I don't know, but that's what I saw. Author and urban explorer Andy Smart visited the location several times to conduct paranormal investigations. Despite the fact that there are no records to back up deaths in the house, Smart wrote on his blog justturnleft.com in 2015 that he met a guy named Jimmy Zhang Sunyin who went to school near Chaonei number 81, and he said, "When I was at school, we used to walk past there every day. We all knew of the stories and tales about that place and that they probably weren't true. However, most of the neighborhood, all the local people living around here and surrounding it know that a girl had died in there at some time. They all know. We all think that the house is a very bad place. We don't know why, we can just feel it. So if there wasn't some officer here who left a woman that hanged herself, what other reason is there that this place would be haunted?" Another bit of lore that is shared claims some urban explorers died in the building in 2007. And then, despite the fact that no one knows the origin story of this place, a legend claims a priest who built the place disappeared before it was completed and that he haunts it.
The Chaonei number 81, or Chaonei Church, is said to be Beijing's most celebrated haunted house. The legends about this location inspired the idea to use it as a set for the 2014 3D horror film, The House That Never Dies. Production began on that in 2011 and would take 3 years, with the filmmakers eventually deciding to film at different locations. But the cast and crew did visit the house, and the director studied 3,000 pages of data on that house that helped give him a vision for the film because of the stories of haunting activity.
And apparently those 3,000 pages of data are in the basement of the Smithsonian, like you said, Kelly, because I'm like, where's all that information?
The film would become the highest-grossing Chinese horror film of all time. Stories of hauntings date to the 1970s. A man named Li Zhongyi told the New York Times in 2013, "Even in the 1970s, people thought the house was haunted. As children, we would play hide and seek in the house, but we didn't dare come in by ourselves." 3 construction workers were doing renovation work in 2001, and during that, they opened up a hole in the basement and saw a flash of light followed by a ghost appearing. They ran terrified from the building and wouldn't return to work.
Should we call them Ghostbusters? They just let a ghost out of the wall.
Who you gonna call? The ghost most commonly claimed to be haunting the house is a woman. Her screams have been heard throughout the years. The house was always said to be cold, even in the summer, and people walking by have always felt uneasy. For years, it was written in chalk outside the gate that there were no ghosts, but locals disagree.
So that's apparently one of the most haunted locations in China, which I was like, well, there's not a whole lot going on there, but okay. And I was like, I've got to find some other places that have some hauntings. Surely Beijing is a huge city. It's got to have a lot of hauntings. So we're going to share some other ones here. And now a little break for a word about one of our sponsors. The Heguang Guild Hall is an opera house in the Xichang district. There are said to be 4 great theaters in Beijing, and this is one of them. The theater was constructed in 1807 and is today part of a complex that includes the theater along with the Wangchang Building, Xingshang Temple, and Chuan Hall. The interior has a stone floor, and the decor features red, green, and gold. That just screams Chinese to me. Seems like that's what you would have there with that. The hall hosts a museum of the opera's history in Beijing. In 1912, the Chinese Nationalist Party was founded here. Sun Yat-sen was the premier of the republic at that time, and he was chosen as the party chairman. During World War II, the theater was used as a home for the poor. Legends claim that the theater was built over a former graveyard, and we already know that's bad news here in America. Now, imagine in a place like China, where ancestors are so revered and their burials are so well kept, as we explained earlier.
Probably not a good thing.
Can you imagine? I don't even know how they would have built something over a graveyard there. It was like, that would be so against the rules. So there are some angry spirits said to be here. Screaming is heard in the courtyard, and don't throw anything into the courtyard, or an audible voice will scold you.
Get off my lawn.
Yes, something like that.
Get that out of my courtyard.
Don't you be throwing rocks over here. And that voice is not anything coming from someone who's living. So it's not like the gardener's passing through and you hit him in the head with a pebble or something.
The Prince Gong Mansion is today a 650,000 square foot museum and tourist attraction with gardens. The mansion was built in 1777 during the Qing dynasty for a court official named He Shen, who was apparently a real dirtbag. Historians claim he was the most corrupt official in all of Chinese history.
I can't even imagine if you're called the most corrupt in all of the history of any country. Wow.
You're a bad dude.
Yeah.
The mansion gets its name from the sixth brother of Emperor Wenzong of Qing, Prince Gong, who was given the mansion in 1851. In 1921, Prince Gong's grandson offered the property to the Benedictines, and they renovated what had become a dilapidated mansion. The Catholic Church used it as part of a university until the priests were deported. It was used as a business property, and in 1996 became a tourist attraction. The most recent renovations were completed during the 2008 Summer Olympics in Beijing.
2 supernatural stories are connected to the mansion and that corrupt official named He Shen. The Emperor Qianlong was a mischievous little boy, and one day he decided to scare one of the imperial concubines. He snuck up quietly behind her while she was putting on her makeup, and the shock caused her to jump, and she accidentally hit him with her comb. A lady of the court saw the concubine strike Qianlong, and she reported it, which resulted in the concubine's disgrace, and she committed suicide. Isn't that awful? I mean,
It is.
she probably just threw her arms up and accidentally hit him with what she had. Qianlong felt guilty about this, and he insisted on seeing her body. He bit his finger and left a mark of blood on her neck so he would recognize her in the next life. He Shen was born shortly after the concubine's death, and he had a birthmark on his neck. Qianlong believed that He Shen was the reincarnation of the concubine. So that's the first paranormal story here. This earned He Shen favor with the emperor and could be why his corruption went unchecked. So that's probably how he became so corrupt, is the emperor was like, I'm not going to say nothing to him because I'm a horrible person for what I ended up doing to her. So the only good thing about He Shen seemed to be his devotion to his wife, Feng Shi. The couple's youngest son died in battle, and she was completely devastated and became ill. It was said that she died of a broken heart, and that may be why her spirit continues to haunt the Prince Gong mansion. Her ghostly wails are heard, and her apparition is seen wandering in the gardens wearing a white dress. So they have
A woman in white.
ladies in white there in China too.
The bell tower in Gulou has a legend going back to the Ming Dynasty. Emperor Yongle wanted a large bronze bell to be built to help keep the city's time, and so he ordered a blacksmith named Deng to do the work. There was a ton of pressure on Deng to get this done on a tight timeline. An immense amount of heat was needed, and the furnace just wasn't getting the job done. Deng's daughter came to visit, and she noticed how stressed her father and his craftsmen were. And so she threw herself into the furnace, and that act of self-sacrifice gave the furnace the boost it needed, and the giant bell was finally cast. The bell seems to have absorbed the spirit of Deng's daughter. This is revealed occasionally when the bell goes zhi zhi zhi, shoo shoo shoo, instead of the normal gong gong gong. Why would the bell be ringing about shoes? Apparently, before the young woman leapt into the furnace, a worker tried to grab her and only managed to get one of her shoes, so she's asking for her shoe back.
Isn't that weird?
It is weird.
It's like, I guess one day people started going, it doesn't sound like that bell's going gong, gong. It's saying she, which is a very weird noise for a bell to make. It's pretty distinctive. And then how could the Forbidden City not be haunted, Kelly? It's one of the things that's like on my bucket list that I know I will never see because I'm never going to take the time to travel to China, but it's something I've always wanted to see. The Forbidden City is the imperial palace complex that was commissioned by Emperor Chengzu of the Ming Dynasty in 1406 when he made Beijing the capital of China. The imperial family began living there in 1420, but even most of them didn't have full access to the property. Only the emperor was allowed full access to everywhere, and that's why it was called the Forbidden City. The buildings were built with feng shui in mind, and the most important buildings honor the sun with their position. Hundreds of buildings were constructed, with 980 of them surviving today.
Wow.
Talk about a huge museum complex.
You know, if I knocked you out, you could survive the long flight.
I would go anywhere if I was knocked out for... That's why I'm like, that is why they have lounges in the airport, I'm sure, so you could drink yourself into oblivion before you get on the plane for 20 hours or whatever.
Maybe.
A 26-foot-high city wall was built around the complex with 3 layers of bricks on each side. The 4 corners have towers, and a legend claims that when one needed to be put back together, the artisans couldn't do it. It was repaired by the immortal patron or deity of architecture in China, Lu Ban. He was an actual person and invented many things during his lifetime from 507 to 444 BC. Upon his death, he became a god in Chinese folk religion. The Forbidden City was an imperial palace until 1924, and it housed 24 emperors in that time. Today, it is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and a museum. And that last emperor was no longer emperor, but they allowed him to stay there, and then he finally decided to leave, and then they took it over.
One of the spirits here is thought to be a concubine named Zhen Fei. The Guangzhou emperor had fallen in love with her in 1887, and this didn't please the aunt of his wife, who was the Empress Dowager Cixi. Cixi also didn't like that the emperor had plans for political reform. When his plans failed, she somehow was able to assume power. She banished the concubine Zhen Fei to a corner of the Forbidden City, where she was forbidden to see the emperor. The Empress Dowager ordered her killed in 1900, so she was drowned in a well and her family wasn't allowed to retrieve the body for a year. An inscription on the well tells this story, but it doesn't share that from that time, a weeping woman dressed in white has been seen walking around the city. Haunting flute music is also heard when no one is in the Forbidden City at night. There are also stories of ghost dogs being seen at the edges of the Forbidden City's labyrinth. Don't worry too much about the ghosts here, though, because the doorways have high thresholds that must be stepped over, and tour guides will tell you that they are there because ghosts can't jump, and they'd be trapped inside that room.
Who knew? Here we see ghosts floating in the air, but I guess over in China they don't float in the air because they can't even get over the threshold.
How many ghosts are here? Could be countless, as some claim the Forbidden City is cursed because Emperor Yongle was said to have slaughtered over 2,800 people in his harem when trying to suppress an alleged sex scandal.
I don't know if he was having some people from other countries that were coming in and he didn't want them to know that he had such a huge harem. So, hey, why not just kill all of them? I mean, you could free them and let them go live their lives, But
they
no.
might tell somebody.
Yeah.
A fire broke out a few years later, and some saw it as punishment for the emperor.
And he actually thought that too. He thought that maybe he had brought a curse upon himself. Another ghost story shared about the Forbidden City dates to 1995. Apparently, a security guard was watching TV in the guard's room when 2 other guards came bursting into the room. They were breathless and scared. They said that they saw a woman dressed in all black walking around, so they went to tell her that she needed to leave. She kept walking away from them, and they finally managed to corner her at a locked door. They ordered her to turn around, and when she did, they saw that she didn't have a face.
Dun, dun, dun.
The guards were so scared they dropped their flashlights and probably peed themselves.
Oh my.
I think I would if a ghost turned around and had no face. The other guard joined them to retrieve their flashlights, and the woman was gone. The flashlights were still on the floor and still on.
Beijing is a huge city with millions of residents and a rich culture connected to the spirit world. Is it possible that ghosts walk among some of the locations in Beijing? Are these places in Beijing haunted?
That is for you to decide. It's a huge city. I'm sure there are a lot more haunted locations than just this, but that's all I was able to find. I was like, wow, that's all they got there in Beijing?
Well, they probably have all that information hidden away somewhere because they don't want people learning about it.
And I'm thinking with all this connection to the ancestors and all these different descriptive ghosts that they probably have a lot of verbal stories that they've shared through the years And if I could read Chinese, I could probably share a bunch of those stories because I'm sure I could find them online. But anywho, all of these places sound very cool. Another place that's very cool is our website. You can check
Nice
that
segue.
out at historygoesbump.com. And if you'd like to send us some feedback, you can do that at historygoesbump@gmail.com. Or you can leave any of your comments on our various social media. Please follow us on X, Facebook, Instagram. You'll find us under History Goes Bump. And you can also find us under that on YouTube. We'd love to have you subscribe to our channel. I want to thank you guys for tuning in to this episode. I've been your host, Diane.
And this has been Kelly.
You take care now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
This episode is brought to you by our executive producers.
Dispatches from the Grave Digger.
We want to welcome into the cemetery Reverend Jim. We're going to be burying you in a niche wall.
Thank you so much for supporting History Goes Bump.
Check out the website at historygoesbump.com.
Due to the thought that intellectual It's in the basement of the Smithsonian.
Can you say Smithsonian?
It's in the stop it. It's
Is
in the
your pronunciation
Stop
of the Smithsonian in the
I
basement?
wanted to
too?
just put it in the main episode, and now you're making a joke out of me. Yeah.
Despite the fact that there are no records to back up deaths in the house, there's no records.
Death in the house.
The guards were so scared they dropped their
Flashlights?
flashlights. They were so scared. I'm so scared I can't even say flashlight.